They say more than 2,000 people vanish in the Appalachian Mountains every single year. Rangers blame poor preparation, sudden weather, alcohol, or simply bad luck. But in one county tucked between nameless ridges, the numbers are worse. Much worse. Hikers vanish without a trace. Sometimes whole groups, their tents abandoned, their packs half open, as if they'd planned to return in a minute. The forest swallows them, and nobody comes back. Sheriff Miller once told a reporter about the first camp he'd seen like that. No struggle, he said. No drag marks. Just bones. Like something had picked the meat clean and left the rest in neat little piles. His words were buried on page 9 of a local paper, never followed up. But they linger in the air here like the smell of wet pine. Now, 5 friends were walking the same ridgeline trail, laughing too loudly for the silence that pressed around them. Mark led, confident and broad-shouldered, the kind of man who always carried the map and acted like he didn't need it. Behind him was Lena, quiet, her camera swinging against her chest. Sarah and Nate argued about whether to stop early or push on, their voices rising and falling. At the back trudged Thomas, hands jammed in his jacket pockets, already annoyed they'd chosen the scenic route. "Another mile, that's all," Mark said, pointing uphill. "There's supposed to be a clearing near a stream." "Perfect camp spot," Thomas muttered. "That's what you said 2 miles ago." But he followed anyway, boots crunching on damp needles. The trail was narrowing, the trees leaning closer, as if to close over them. By dusk, they reached a flat patch of ground where moss spread like a dark rug. They dropped packs, stretched, and unpacked food. Lena set up her tripod, pointing it toward the fading light. Sarah crouched to light the stove, her hands trembling more than she wanted anyone to notice. "Cold already," she said, glancing toward the shadows thickening between trees. "Feels different here." "Different how?" Nate teased, cracking open a bag of jerky. "Like you're about to get eaten by a bear?" Sarah didn't laugh. Neither did Thomas. The forest seemed to listen, the quiet swallowing their voices faster than it should. After dinner, Mark suggested a short walk to fill water bottles. They followed the sound of trickling water, pushing through brush, until the beam of a flashlight caught something pale. At first, it looked like driftwood scattered across the mud. But driftwood doesn't have ribs. Driftwood doesn't still have scraps of torn clothing clinging to it. Sarah gasped and covered her mouth. "Oh my God, is that bones?" Mark finished flatly, crouching down. His fingers hovered above a cracked femur, then pulled back. "Human." Thomas cursed under his breath. "We should turn back." Now Nate tried to laugh, but it broke halfway. "Could be old. Decades. Maybe some hunter." "Those aren't hunting clothes," Lena whispered. She had raised her camera, but her hand shook too much to press the shutter. The skull in the dirt had a hole in its temple, but not a bullet hole. More like something crushed it. They filled their bottles in silence and returned to camp, each step heavier. Nobody joked anymore. That night, the fire popped and hissed, the smoke curling into the black canopy. The group sat close, shoulders nearly touching, as if the dark pressed them tighter together. "Let's just pack up at first light," Sarah said. "Go back the way we came." Mark shook his head. "We're not lost. We're fine. Just someone must have gotten hurt here years ago." "It's not a big deal. It is a big deal," Thomas snapped. His voice was too loud, carrying into the woods. He lowered it quickly. "You saw that skull. You want to sleep on top of a graveyard?" Nobody answered. The silence afterward felt heavier than the argument. Lena had been staring into the tree line. She finally spoke, her voice low. "Does anyone else see that?" 4 heads turned. At first, it seemed like nothing, just shadows layered on shadows. Then, as eyes adjusted, 2 small red points gleamed between the trunks, too high from the ground to be campfire sparks, perfectly still, watching. Mark reached for his flashlight, but before he switched it on, the points blinked out. Gone. Nate exhaled shakily. Probably just. But the sound that followed wasn't wind. It was low, deep, rolling through the trees. A howl that didn't sound like any coyote or dog. Something heavier, hungrier, and it was closer than it should have been. The howl bled into silence, and for a long time, none of them moved. The fire snapped, a twig cracked somewhere out of sight, and every breath felt too loud. "We leave." "First thing," Sarah whispered. Her face was pale in the firelight. Nobody argued this time, not even Mark. They didn't sleep much. The night stretched endlessly, every rustle outside the tent pulling them back to wakefulness. At one point, Thomas swore he heard something pacing just beyond the nylon wall. Soft footfalls circling, pausing, then circling again. He clenched his knife in sweaty hands until dawn finally broke. Morning felt no safer. The forest was heavy with mist, the trail harder to follow. Still, they packed quickly and set out, shoulders aching from the weight of damp gear. The silence between them was different now, tight, strained, like all their words had been chewed away by the night. "Which way?" Lena asked quietly as Mark studied the map. "Back," Mark said. "Same route." Should be simple, but it wasn't. Twice the path forked where it shouldn't have. The trees looked wrong, leaning closer, their bark scarred with long vertical gashes. At one bend, Nate stopped, staring at the ground. "Footprints," he said. The others gathered. The prints were massive, larger than any dog, broader than any wolf they'd ever seen in a book. The claws had sunk deep into the mud. "Still wet," Thomas muttered. He glanced around, every shadow suddenly threatening. "They're following us." Mark pushed them onward, but nerves frayed. Jokes died half-spoken. Packs seemed heavier. The forest pressed tighter until the trail was nothing more than a suggestion. By midday, they stopped to drink at a small creek. Nate went 20 paces downstream, muttering about finding a spot out of sight. Minutes passed. Then more. "Where the hell is he?" Thomas asked, rising. They called his name, their voices ragged, bouncing off the trees. No answer. Mark pushed through brush where Nate had gone. The ground was torn, leaves scattered, as if something heavy had swept through. And there, half hidden under fern fronds, was a splash of dark red staining the stones. Mark's voice was hoarse. "He's gone." Sarah shook her head violently. No, he probably just walked off. We have to keep looking." "Looking for what?" Thomas snapped. "You saw the prints? You saw the blood. He's not coming back." Lena's hands tightened on her camera. She hadn't filmed since last night. Now the lens hung uselessly, pointed at the dirt. "We need to move. If we stay here, it'll happen to all of us." So they moved, faster now, stumbling over roots, packs slamming against their backs. The forest gave no direction, no promise of escape. Then they saw them. At first, only shapes between the trees, motionless, tall, black against the gray daylight. Then eyes. Dozens of them, red pinpricks, unwavering. The wolves stood silent, huge and lean, their fur like shadows soaked in oil. They did not growl. They did not bare their teeth. They only watched, muscles tense, as if waiting for something unseen to signal them. Sarah whimpered. "Why aren't they attacking?" Mark forced a steady tone. "Don't run. Just keep walking." So they walked, every step slow, deliberate. The wolves followed, fanning out, staying always just beyond reach. Branches snapped softly under their paws. By late afternoon, the group stumbled into a hollow where trees opened around a blackened oak. At its roots lay bones, dozens of them stacked neatly, some still wrapped in tatters of clothing. Skulls stared upward, mouths frozen open. Lena choked on her breath. "They collect them." Thomas staggered back, nearly dropping his pack. Jesus Christ. The wolves ringed the clearing now. Silent, the red of their eyes burning through the dusk. Mark's hand hovered near his knife. Don't give him a reason. But the pack didn't move. They only stared, patient as stone, as if they had all the time in the world. And then, one by one, the eyes blinked out. Not retreating, just sinking deeper into the trees, vanishing until the clearing was dark again. "Where did they go?" Sarah whispered. The only answer was the creak of the oak above them, its bark carved with deep, vertical scars, marks that looked less like claws and more like someone had been counting. And the last mark was still fresh. They didn't argue about fire this time. They simply didn't build one. The clearing with the blackened oak was too quiet, the bones at its roots too fresh. 4 shadows crouched close together, whispering only when the silence grew unbearable. Every sound beyond the tree line felt magnified. The crunch of leaves, the faint brush of fur against bark, the slow circling of something too heavy to be unseen. "We can't stay here," Thomas said, voice low but hard. "We're sitting in their nest." Sarah's reply cracked as if she were holding back tears. "And if we walk in the dark, we'll never see them coming." Mark exhaled through his nose, steady but strained. "At first light. That's the only way." The night dragged. Lena pressed her camera against her chest like it was a charm, though the battery was long dead. She thought she heard breathing just inches from the tent fabric. Slow, heavy, deliberate. She held her breath until dawn. By morning, they were ready before the sun touched the treetops. They didn't eat. They didn't look at one another. They just moved, heads down, packs groaning. The forest seemed narrower now. Branches clawed at their shoulders, roots snatched at their boots. Every corner of the eye was crowded with motion, shapes too large to be deer, too quiet to be bears. Near midday, Sarah stumbled, clutching her knees. She had fallen behind, her breath ragged. Mark turned to help her, but froze. 3 wolves stood between them and her, massive, black as smoke, eyes burning. They didn't advance, didn't even twitch. They only stood, as though daring her to move. "Stay still," Mark whispered. But Sarah panicked. She broke into a sprint, crashing through brush, vanishing into the trees. For a moment they heard her footfalls, then nothing. No scream, no struggle. Just the silence returning, heavier than before. They found her pack hours later, snagged on a branch. Torn open, empty. By dusk, only 3 walked on. Mark carried his knife in hand, his shoulders rigid. Thomas muttered curses under his breath, his eyes wild. Lena brought up the rear, her camera dangling uselessly, eyes wide and hollow. That night they built a fire anyway, though the wood was wet and the smoke choked them. It didn't matter. The wolves gathered again in the dark, forming a circle. Dozens of eyes glowed beyond the firelight, unblinking. They didn't growl. They didn't lunge. They just sat and waited. "They're not hungry," Thomas said, voice shaking. "If they were hungry, we'd be dead already." "Then what do they want?" Lena whispered. Thomas didn't answer. He stared at the eyes until dawn, his knife across his knees. When Mark and Lena woke, Thomas was gone. No blood, no struggle. Just an empty space in the grass where he had lain. Now there were two. They barely spoke anymore. Exhaustion hollowed them out. The wolves no longer pretended to hide. They padded openly along both sides, moving as the hikers moved, never faster, never slower. A perfect shadow of their steps. Late that afternoon, Mark and Lena stumbled into another clearing. This one was vast, stripped of trees, the ground pale. At first, Lena thought it was snow, but it wasn't. Bones. Thousands of them. They crunched underfoot, shifting with each step, filling the air with brittle pops. Human skulls lay beside animal ribs, tangled in impossible heaps. Some still clung to scraps of clothing, jackets shredded, boots split. Lena dropped her camera, the crack of its fall swallowed by the sea of white. Mark froze, jaw clenched, knife trembling in his hand. "This is it," he whispered. "This is where they ended." The wolves emerged from the tree line in silence. Dozens, maybe more than they could count. They spread slowly, deliberately, until the pair stood in the center of a tightening circle. Lena clutched Mark's arm, voice cracking. "What do we do?" Mark's eyes darted across the field of bones, across the unbroken ring of red eyes. His voice broke as he said, "There's nothing left to do." The wolves stopped just 5 paces away. They stood waiting, as if time itself were theirs to command. The silence pressed closer, heavier than any sound. Mark raised his knife, though it shook in his hand. Lena closed her eyes, tears cutting lines through the dirt on her cheeks. The circle tightened step by step. Bones shattered underfoot. The last light of the sky disappeared behind black fur and burning eyes. And in that silence, the forest claimed them. If this story unsettled you, leave a like and let the shadows know. Subscribe for more tales you shouldn't hear after dark. And if you've seen something you can't explain, tell us in the comments. We're always listening.